What makes a great fight scene great? What is it that separates the contenders from the also-rans? We're gonna pick through the best fights in anime, scrape by scrape and blow by blow to find out. I'm Geoff Thew, and this is Animelee. Though this Animelee is gonna need to be a little different from most, because ReZero does its fights a little differently from most anime, and Petelgeuse's powers in particular make this fight even more different. In your average anime, the story progresses until a fight occurs, two sets of superpowers and ideals are tested against each other, someone wins, someone else loses, and maybe dies in the process, and that's the end of it. There's a clean start and finish to the action that allows for tightly contained beat-by-beat analysis. In ReZero, though, Subaru's anime superpower means that death is just the beginning, and once he returns to a checkpoint, every decision he makes, in combat and conversation alike, is a move toward his eventual victory and survival. If not a particularly calculated move, on account of how he's kind of a dumbass. Pit return by death against Petelgeuse's ability to transfer his soul into any one of his fingers, or Subaru when he dies, and it's easy to see how their fight could stretch across 4 episodes and 2 time loops. But really, all of that's just the climax of the fight. Everything that happens in ReZero's second core, from the moment Subaru becomes aware that the manor has been attacked in episode 14, is part of his fight to subvert the machinations of the witch cult. He just, also has to fight his own shitty inner nature along the way. And also a giant flying monster whale that has terrorized the world for centuries, leaving literally countless dead in its wake with its terrifying ability to erase people from existence. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to be breaking down that whole classically styled epic fantasy battle, at least not in this video. We're going to have our hands more than full enough just accounting for the witch cult's guerrilla tactics and Subaru's growth through that fight. But that said, the courage that Subaru builds through battling the whale and the allies he earns by taking it on are every bit as instrumental to his fight against Petelgeuse as anything he learns in the first proper battle against the cult itself. And so are many of the things he learned through his initial failed attempts to solve the problem on his own, and by on his own I mean by letting Rem do all the work for him. Before we get into all that though, I should let you know that this video is brought to you by Crunchyroll, where you can stream both seasons of ReZero, plus the director's cut and OVAs, and a ton of other great anime besides, with new episodes subtitled in multiple languages the same day they air in Japan. For just $8 a month, Crunchyroll gives you access to an absolutely massive and ever-growing library of anime, from all-time classics to brand new smash hits. And if you head to crunchyroll.com/basement to get a 14-day free trial, you won't even have to pay that much to check it all out. You can use that trial to refresh yourself on ReZero and jump into the new season, which has gotten off to a brutally tragic start, and you have plenty of options depending on how you want to watch or rewatch it. The director's cut I mentioned earlier makes subtle improvements to several scenes throughout the series, but Crunchyroll also offers multiple dubs of the original, and while I can't directly speak to the quality of the Spanish or Portuguese, the English dub is one of the best I've ever heard. However you want to watch ReZero, or any other anime for that matter, make sure you head to crunchyroll.com/basement first to get your 14-day free trial. Now, we've got a lot of fight to talk about today, so let's get going, shall we? In the first round of the fight, Subaru does so poorly that he doesn't even get to see the enemy leader, only the aftermath of their attack. He does technically contribute to the fight. If he hadn't been pathetic enough to make Rem ditch him at the inn, those goons she killed outside the mansion would have killed Rom instead, then more cultists would have gotten in and killed Emilia before she could lock herself in the cellar to slowly bleed out. So that's something. But even as much as he fails here, he does get 2 clues to the cult's plans and nature in this timeline. They bow to him when he first enters the domain, the first hint we get that his witch's scent gives him leverage over the cult, and the smoke from the magic stone explosion is visible as he approaches Arlem Village, though he's too caught up in staring slack-jawed at all the corpses to really process any of that information. All things considered, he may as well have done nothing at all here, and he tries that in the next time loop, leading to an even more gruesome death for Rem. Though, as she gets to at least tell him she loves him and die in his arms, she would probably count it as an improvement overall. We also get to see her fight the witch cult this time around, learning in the process that their main modes of attack are their blades, which can take the head off a ground dragon, and their fire magic. Both in the woods, where they're ambushed, and in the cave where she eventually dies, Rem's fighting abilities are gloriously animated. Her ball and chain has some serious heft behind it, leaving plenty of gorgeous carnage and destruction in its wake, and her Oni rage-fueled attacks and expressions have a nice, violent snap to them that contrasts nicely with the creepy, floppy fluidity of Petelgeuse's motions. He looks like a Western cartoon character with his eye-popping animations and mugging for the camera, and I am here for every frame of that. Just the unnatural way he tilts his head hints at his true nature. Not a human at all, but a body-snatching spirit monster, manipulating its ill-fitting skin suits like manic marionettes. In every aspect, animation and voice acting, English and Japanese alike, Betelgeuse Romanee Conti is one of the single best performed and most memorable anime characters in recent memory. And he makes a hell of a first impression here. First, when he's alone with Subaru, his insane ranting and wild gesticulations immediately tell us that he's dangerously unstable, and the fact that he pummels his own lackey into the pavement right after praising him for felling a ground dragon shows how little it takes to push him to violence. The fact that he doesn't beat an answer out of Subaru, despite his intense curiosity and clear disdain for the boy's feigned madness and sloth, is yet another strong indicator of just how much leverage our protagonist actually has over the cult. Subaru could have used that leverage to extract information from the talkative archbishop, more than he gives away about his own ideology through his crazed preaching anyway, or possibly even saved Rem's life, if he'd had his wits about him, but Protag-kun was too busy moping, moaning, and eventually screeching impotent threats to actually try, leaving Betelgeuse free to leave us with an even more striking impression with his casually cold-blooded, gloating murder of our beloved best girl. Despite all of the opportunities that Subaru misses in this loop, it's hard not to empathize at least with the sentiment behind his screams at the end. Anyone who sees that happen to Rem is gonna want to see this creepy fucker dead, but even after she frees him with her dying breath, Subaru isn't done letting Rem down. In direct defiance of her plea for him to live, he mindlessly charges straight into the manor, where the raging power of the awakened Puck flash freezes him into a Subaru-sicle. No matter how much it makes the people he cares for suffer, he's only thinking about what he wants. And it takes a lot to disabuse him of that selfish behavior. In his third attempt, Subaru finally thinks to ask Krush and the other king candidates for help, but with nothing to offer them in exchange, he gets nowhere fast and leaves them all thinking of him as a pathetic and incompetent fool. His pathetic incompetence subsequently gets Rem killed again, along with a whole mess of merchants, and eventually Emilia when he breaks the one rule of return by death. Still, he learns a lot of useful info about the White Whale and other camps through these failures, which eventually does allow him to save the day, once Rem yanks his head out of his ass and talks him out of giving up anyway. And in the aftermath of Emilia's death, he's provided with several more important clues as to what it will take to finally defeat the Sin Archbishop of Sloth. Firstly, he learns that he alone is able to see the unseen hands, and in Betelgeuse's panicked reaction to this revelation, we learn that the villain's strange habit of mangling his own fingers in his mouth is what allows him to summon more of them. Unfortunately for him, the best he's got isn't nearly enough to defeat Puck, who implies that different users of the hands have different upper limits to how many they can summon, with the Witch of Envy, who Puck knew apparently, being able to call forth over 2,000. In the last moments of this loop, Subaru sees one more aspect of Betelgeuse's power. The cackling villain possesses his body, but he's too busy freezing to death to make sense of what's going on. If he'd thought about it a little more, perhaps he'd have been able to save Emilia in one less loop, but that's speculation, and at least after this death, plus an episode-length pep talk from a waifu who is frankly wasted on him, he finally finds the resolve to take on the cult in earnest. The first step he takes toward that is opening up to Rem and asking her for help in forming a plan, instead of just telling her what to do. The second is figuring out what Crush and Co. want from the abundance of context clues he's been given over the last few loops, and dangling that in front of her and Anastasia. And from there, a lot of stuff happens. There's a big fight with a giant monster whale that lasts 2 whole episodes and takes Rem out of the picture, but in her place, he gains the aid of certified badasses Ferris, Wilhelm, Mimi, TV, Ricardo, and, of course, Julius, plus a couple dozen other soldiers and mercenaries on loan from Crush and Anastasia. He informs the assembled warriors of everything he knows about the cult, instilling them with confidence that it can be easily overcome, and vows that nobody will die on this mission. A promise that he does more or less keep, though not in this timeline. To be fair, they are on a bit of a hot streak after killing a 400-year-old monster, so the overconfidence is at least understandable. Subaru's none too happy to see Julius in particular on account of the ass-whooping the knight gave him when last they met, but he's had his own failings beaten into him thoroughly enough by this point to at least recognize that he was mostly at fault there. He makes his long overdue apology, though he still has a ways to go before he can trust Julius completely, as they head off into the Mather's domain to confront the Sin Archbishop. And at long last, the Animelee proper begins. Subaru reaches the cave where he once watched Rem die, and Petelgeuse greets him by speaking very moistly. Subaru's words as he enters the cult's domain indicate he's figured out that the love Petelgeuse keeps referring to is the same witch's scent that Rem has noted hangs so heavily on him. Petelgeuse confirms that suspicion by sniffing Subaru before remarking on how loved he is, and asking, based on that, if he's the final Sin Archbishop, Pride. This lays the groundwork for one of Subaru's counterattacks later on. Subaru's half-hearted acting isn't enough to fool the Archbishop for long. He first becomes suspicious when he realizes the boy isn't mentioned in his gospel, and Subaru's lame excuse for losing his own copy of the precious book confirms that he's not to be trusted. Unfortunately for him, Subaru's bought enough time for his allies to get into position, and he's only able to launch a single, easily evaded attack with his unseen hands before the kitties show up to Fusro Da the cultists in the cave to death, causing his brain to tremble so hard he starts bleeding from his eyes. As he tries to make sense of what's happening in a way that squares with what's predicted in his gospel, he concludes that Subaru must be here to challenge him for his status.
Of course, it all makes sense. I'm not afraid. The time has come to find out which one of us is worthy of a love.
Subaru has other plans, though, and right as the Archbishop gets ready to throw down, Wilhelm swoops in from behind to finish him off in one clean cut. And with that, it's over. Except that, of course it's not. Even Subaru doesn't trust that dead body to stay dead, and not even blowing the bishop's corpse to smithereens can stop him from coming back. We do get to enjoy a brief lull in the action where the assembled soldiers laugh together and Julius warms up to Subaru a little more, but the second they drop their guards, disaster strikes. A mass of unseen hands rushes out of the woods to crush several of their companions, including the most important one, Slothman, and in the ensuing bloody chaos, Subaru is dragged off into the woods and dangled from a tree. As he struggles to escape, an unfamiliar voice utters some very familiar words.
My brain, it trembles!
Subaru reasons out what's going on, that Petelgeuse is able to transfer his mind into the body of the fingers, but that explanation is honestly unnecessary here. Even with a totally different cadence and appearance, the finger's distinctive performance, both voiced and animated, instantly identifies him. Only one person makes expressions that crazed or bends that far backwards in the throes of surprise. And only one person would be so eager to sniff Subaru, besides maybe Rem. The newly reborn Archbishop is convinced that Subaru must be Pride and excited at the prospect of inducting him into the cult's ranks, but his mood quickly sours when he discovers that his own gospel is missing. In the heat of the moment, he nearly crushes the boy to death, but he's stopped by the appearance of one of Julius's spirits, Ia, which provokes a thoroughly uncharacteristic reaction from the villain. In every past appearance, Petelgeuse has oscillated rapidly between a number of emotions: elation, confusion, rage, mocking excitement, and calm, businesslike boss talk. But even when he was surrounded and in danger, he didn't show a hint of fear. Ia, though, clearly terrifies him. He cowers before the tiny speck of light and lashes out seemingly at random, his unseen hand plowing through the surrounding trees in a beautifully animated shot. This panic is a hint at Petelgeuse's greatest weakness. As a transient soul, he's pretty difficult to kill, but other spirits are able to harm him. And another of his weaknesses is revealed a moment later. Right as another hand closes in on Subaru, Mimi and Tivy appear to save the day, blasting it and the tree beside him away and showering the area in swamp water, which reveals the hands to the naked eye. As they close in on the twins, Wilhelm cuts them down with ease before bisecting the mad cultist. Subaru is saved, and his allies now know how to counter their invisible enemy, but the lives lost to his miscalculation weigh heavily on him, and he's very nearly ready to give up again until Wilhelm confronts him. The old man has doubtless felt this kind of survivor's guilt before, and while Subaru expects admonishment for his failings, he instead gets a valuable piece of advice. Keep fighting. Use every ounce of strength in your body to reach for victory and give meaning to your regrets. Don't give up until you absolutely have to. You don't need to get stronger, you need to be strong. It's exactly what Subaru needs to hear, and with his resolve restored, he waves the merchants and mercenaries on to head for Arlem Village. Funnily enough, the merchant he waves to is the finger currently possessed by Petelgeuse, biding his time as he waits for another chance to attack. As they ride on to the village, Ferris pulls up alongside Subaru to encourage him to truly make amends with Julius and let go of his lingering resentment. The episode ends as he goes to do just that, only to be interrupted by an illusory attack from Rom. And this is one of those points that highlights why this fight is so messy to analyze, because while it's Rom doing the actual attacking here, it only happens as a result of the witch cult's information warfare. Or so it appears in the moment, anyway. In truth, the witch cult didn't directly interfere with the letter. If they had, they'd probably have known more about the Alliance in advance. Its erasure is actually just collateral damage from the gluttony sex attack on the person who wrote it, whose name is escaping me right now. In addition to heightening the terrifying sense that the cult is several steps ahead of our heroes, this brief clash serves to set up their eventual path to victory in the fight's back half. Julius's sense-sharing spell, Necked. While the spell helps the other soldiers escape, Subaru's oversensitivity to spirits leaves him reeling from the flood of thoughts pouring into his brain. You could even say it's trembling. This same sensitivity, it's worth noting, is also what leaves him vulnerable to Petelgeuse's possession magic, and likely explains why Puck takes an immediate shine to him, and why it's so easy for him to find Beatrice's library. Though, like the dick he is, Subaru completely fails to realize that Betty is also his friend when he explains everything about spirits to Julius in the village. Or maybe he just fails to realize that she's a spirit. He is, as we've established, kind of a dumbass. Once they've cleared up the confusion with the best and also only made in the Mathers domain, the squad marches on to evacuate Arlem. This doesn't quite go to plan either. Subaru tries to sugarcoat the situation to the villagers, but they're already aware of the threat posed by the witch cult, and his dishonesty only angers them. Though, being bigots, they quickly turn that anger toward the half-elf Emilia. Subaru briefly falters at this, wondering if he's just hurting Emilia more by increasing the racial tension in the village around her, but Ferris reassures him and gives him one more important tip, that, alongside Wilhelm's words, guides all of his actions to follow in this fight. Holding your head high when you're doing the right thing inspires confidence in others, and if you think that's embarrassing, Think about that time you threw a big tantrum in front of the whole government. Subaru's renewed confidence, with an assist from Rom, convinces the villagers to evacuate despite their misgivings, but before the plan can get underway, it's waylaid by a surprise attack from the cult. Ferris thinks they've gotten the upper hand by identifying and incapacitating a spy among the merchants, but doesn't realize that finger has already become Petelgeuse. Yes! And is subsequently caught off guard by a self-destruct spell that detonates the fire magic crystals hidden in his cart and signals the rest of the cult to attack. This briefly knocks Subaru out, and when he comes to, the town has erupted into chaos. Houses are ablaze, countless villagers lay slaughtered in the street, and the knights and mercenaries are fighting bravely to save the survivors from the remaining cultists. As Subaru and Julius prepare to find and crush the remaining fingers, the unseen arms erupt from a nearby street in a sudden burst of sumptuous sakuga, telling them where to go. We cut to Wilhelm, dashing through the onslaught with surprising agility for his age, or any age for that matter, this time facing down Petelgeuse in the body of a fellow senior citizen whose taut, wrinkled face only serves to enhance the villain's already creepy mannerisms. As usual, the Swordmaster's moves are fast and precise, kicking up dust to reveal the hands and cutting them down in a single slice. It's so fun to watch Wilhelm fend these attacks off that even Petelgeuse gets into it, rambling excitedly about the old man's diligence until his trembling brain sends him reeling and creates an opening. Or so he'd like us to believe. As his sneak attack with the merchant finger shows, the Archbishop is capable of suppressing his mad mannerisms and exercising patience to get the upper hand, and this moment of supposed vulnerability is really a feint to get the Swordmaster in range of his self-destruction spell. And it absolutely makes sense that he'd sacrifice a finger to do that. Wilhelm's killed Petelgeuse twice, make that 3 times now, without taking a single hit. He's a clear threat who needs to be eliminated, and petty guy that he is, Sloth probably has a bit of a grudge against him at this point, which would explain why he's so openly distraught when he hops into his new body, only to see that Wilhelm has survived the blast with only crippling injuries. I absolutely love the character animation that introduces this new body. The crazed flailing and wide-eyed shrieking really conveys the villain's mounting desperation and rage. Thinking fast, Subaru redirects that rage by pulling out Petelgeuse's gospel, goading him into giving chase while Julius mops up the remaining cultists and saves Wilhelm's life. And finally, the seeds planted with all that uncomfortable sniffing are about to bear fruit. The unseen hands have always been threatening, but in this moment they look particularly deadly. The animators working on this fight did a great job of selling their weight and power without undermining the chaotic, writhing motion that makes them so damn creepy. They tear through the fencing and gates surrounding the village, and unlike Wilhelm, Subaru is barely able to avoid them, eventually getting knocked down a hill by one of their powerful strikes. As he closes in, Petelgeuse mocks Subaru for even thinking he could run away, but the joke is ultimately on him as Subaru pulls out one of Emilia's barrier crystals, and the Woolgarm pack it had been warding off comes in to claim their new witch-scented chew toy. And boy, it sure is satisfying to see a villain get a taste of what Subaru suffered during the Mansion arc. The satisfaction doesn't last long, however, as Subaru returns to the village to see the last finger cackling in a very memeable manner as his cultists cut down yet more innocent villagers. But right when things seem at their bleakest, a hero steps in to save the day. Emilia, who freezes the cultists around him with a single blast of her ice magic. Petelgeuse reacts to her appearance with more cackling and tears of sheer religious ecstasy. It's easily the creepiest shit he's done yet, which is saying a lot, and his animations get even more erratic and unnatural from there. Subaru's first instinct is to leap in to save her, but Ferris stays his hand, assuring him Emilia's more capable than he thinks she is. A notion that she instantly proves right. With her ice crystals and snow particles hanging in the air, Emilia is able to see the unseen hands and dodge their attacks, and with Puck's assistance, she rebukes the unwanted advances of their owner with a spectacular shower of icicles. It's not enough to kill the bishop, but it does provoke him into charging her head-on, only to be met with a massive ice blast to the face that's too hefty for his hands to deflect. The spell leaves him hanging from a frozen crucifix, where Emilia finishes him off using the same deadly ice blossom power that she had so much trouble controlling in the Frozen Bond OVA. The last of the cultists are killed shortly after, and in a powerful moment, the surviving villagers look to Emilia for the first time not as a threat, but as a savior. It's now her turn to be moved to tears, and it would be Subaru's turn to approach her and make amends next, if the battle were actually over. As Petelgeuse's soul enters his body, Ea leaves Subaru, and feeling himself about to lose control, he runs off into the woods where he can't hurt anyone. Ferris and Julius give chase, but when they reach him, it's already too late. Petelgeuse has already taken control, as demonstrated by yet more great character animation and phenomenal performances from Subaru's voice actors in both English and Japanese that mirror his tirade against Emilia from episode 13 in interesting ways. Sloth could attack them at any time now, though they are bought a few precious seconds as the crazed cultist revels in the feelings of love that drench this new body. This lets Subaru fight back just enough to beg his friends to kill him, and while Julius, who regrets the harm he's already done to the self-proclaimed knight and wants to make amends, can't bring himself to do it, Ferris tearfully accepts the request. In an arc full of brutal moments, this one hits particularly hard. The unresolved conflict between Subaru and Julius makes this death especially tragic, and the way Ferris's voice breaks just gets me. It gets through to Julius as well, who reluctantly delivers the killing blow with his spirit sword, ending Sloth's long reign of terror once and for all. This act will weigh heavily on the both of them, though, and on Emilia, who senses Subaru dying all the way from the village, just too late to save him. After that hard-fought battle, things reset once more, and Subaru is relieved to see that his checkpoint has at least been updated to after the fight with the white whale. Sure would be some shitty game design if he had to go through all of that again just to get another crack at the final boss. Subaru may not have survived the last encounter with the witch cult, but he learned a lot from it, and in this new timeline, he's able to pick the assembled soldiers' brains for ideas on how to defeat his body-snatching abilities. Julius, big ol' nerd that he is, has heard of an ancient spell that could explain such an ability, and the distaste he shows for that indicates that he understands how it works on a metaphysical level, another hint that it's tied in some way to his area of expertise, spirit arts. Based on this knowledge, he lays out new conditions for beating Petelgeuse. They must kill all of his confidants, the Fingers, before confronting him, which is straightforward enough, so to create a sense of mystery and tension around it, the series cuts away to Emilia in the mansion before he can explain how to solve the additional problem of Petelgeuse possessing Subaru. This also allows us to hear what Emilia and Puck were talking about that morning, and see how the villagers' rejection of her efforts to help them, compounded by the stress of fighting with Subaru and facing bigotry at the royal selection, is affecting our heroine's nerves, something that adds a bit of retroactive emotional weight to her tears in the previous episode. As she heads downstairs, we realize that Subaru's plan is already well underway. He and Wilhelm made a beeline for the mansion in this timeline to give Emilia as much time as possible to escape. When she still hesitates about trusting Wilhelm, Subaru barges in to give her a push in the right direction, disguised in her recognition-blocking cloak to prevent any delays due to awkwardness between them. Knowing how much she cares for the villagers, he focuses on conveying the danger that they're in, and as he predicts, this prompts the pure-hearted girl to take swift action. Things go pretty smoothly from here, thanks again to Subaru, who's already primed the villagers to trust the soldiers and Emilia. In this timeline, he follows Ferris's advice from the get-go. Though he puts his head to the ground instead of holding it high, he speaks confidently of Mealy's inherent goodness and is honest with the villagers both about the danger that they're in and her desire to protect them. Funny enough, the guy who gave them the most trouble in the last time loop, calling out Subaru's lie and blaming Emilia for the danger, is swayed enough by this act of straight-laced humility to put his prejudices aside and trust Subaru completely. The whole village, in fact, is moved by its hopeless hero Subaru's honesty and kindness, which dispels their fear and distrust. This leads to a moment of equal emotional potency to Emilia's victory in the last episode, when the children of the village accept her without hesitation, despite the stories they've no doubt heard about half-elves and the Witch of Envy. If you've seen what she went through in the Frozen Bond OVA, this hits even harder, but don't let that upswelling of emotion distract you from a crucial detail that pops up in this scene. Petra recognized Emilia, and the fact that she nods to Subaru indicates that she knows who he is as well, despite both of them having been covered at one point by an anti-recognition spell crafted by Lord Roswal himself. You know, the same wizard who did this.
Oh my! You look an absolute fright, don't you, Subaru?
This is a not insignificant feat of magical ability on Petra's part that marks her as more than she first appears, especially when you consider that the enchantment is powerful enough to hide the witch's scent on Subaru, allowing him to sneak up on the cultists as they rendezvous with the merchant Finger on the clifftop overlooking the town. The trap that Team Subaru laid for the Finger here is pretty devious. By using the spy to feed the cult a delayed timetable for the escape, they're buying the fleeing carriages some much-needed wiggle room, and laying bait for the other Fingers to get ambushed while they're positioning themselves to ambush Emilia. Subaru doesn't even know how right he is when he says, "You're about to learn how terrifying it is to have an enemy who's always one step ahead of you." Beyond even the power of their sin authorities, the witch cult's greatest advantage lies in their gospel, which guides them to their destiny and predicts the future. Hence why Petelgeuse was so surprised to see no mention of Subaru in his. Subaru's strange existence, which transcends time itself, makes him uniquely qualified to take the cult on. The rest of the plan goes uncharacteristically smoothly for this series.
Hooray! We killed all of them! Please don't say that. It makes us sound awful.
And that's all it really has to say about the hunt for the Fingers, which is great for us because it means we get to jump right into the good shit. When the time comes to finally challenge Petelgeuse once more, his reintroduction is magnificently creepy. The way he's just standing there in the cave, grinning that awful grin with his mottled green mug, the shadow cloaking him and absolute silence surrounding him until he speaks, really accentuate his disturbing menace. This battle wouldn't be anywhere near as great as it is without such an intimidating and memorable villain at its center, and while it was fun enough to watch him fight through the Fingers, these last two episodes really give the iconic Betelgeuse classic design a chance to shine, while revealing exactly what makes him tick as a character. Before the unseen fists start flying, though, Subaru must first engage him in a battle of wits. This time, having learned from his prior failures to trick the Archbishop, Subaru imitates Betelgeuse's perversely pious mannerisms and presents himself as a devout servant of the witch, looking to become one of Sloth's Fingers. This surprising act of subordination from one just as loved as himself inspires the old zealot to self-flagellate against a nearby rock, penance for his slothful failure to find Subaru before he found him. Subaru convinces him that the witch wouldn't want that for her beloved follower, that all she wants is for him to happily carry out the ordeal, and this insincere parroting of his own insane rambling moves Betelgeuse so deeply that he pulls him in for a tight, brotherly hug. The animation throughout this whole conversation is just phenomenal. The way Betelgeuse's grotesque features twist and contort into an exaggerated mask of his emotions as he talks, the absurd contortions of his misshapen body. He goes full Looney Tune here, and it only intensifies as the fight gets underway. Subaru almost starts it himself when Betelgeuse reveals the true nature of the ordeal, that it's merely a test to see if Emilia is a worthy vessel for Satella, Emilia, and that she's nothing but an afterthought in the plan that's caused her to suffer and die so horribly in so many timelines. Also, dropping that half-devil slur really doesn't help, but Subaru holds his rage in for a moment longer to catch the bastard by sideways surprise. When Petelgeuse asks to see his gospel, Subaru instead produces one of the media stolen from the fingers, and on the other end of the line, Ferris starts taunting him about his scary face. Before he can even process what's happening, Petrosh charges out to knock him on his ass, and when he goes to counter with his unseen hands, Subaru hops on the ground dragon to evade, leaving him even more confused as to how his authority can be seen. And again, before he's able to process this new information, Subaru drops another bombshell, that he's got a direct line to the witch, and that they're so close that she's touched his heart. All of this is a calculated effort to overwhelm and enrage Petelgeuse, so that he can be led into Julius's ambush when he's not thinking clearly. And it works like a charm. The Archbishop munches through both of his seen hands, causing a forest of unseen ones to blossom from his back. Then he uses those to give chase, having them carry him through the air in a pose that screams, "No talk, me Angie." This is one of my single favorite bits of animation in the entire show, and I love that when the Kitty twins show up to get the remaining cultists off Subaru's back, we get to see how it looks even more ridiculous from their perspectives. I also really like seeing the newly humbled Subaru profusely thanking everyone who helps him, especially Petrosh, who is the goodest of girls and deserves all the praise. The chase itself is pretty exciting too, with the knife-wielding cultists closing in on the ground dragon and the hands crashing down all around her, creating a solid sense of tension and danger, though it's got nothing on the fight and chase to follow. Subaru's taunting is effective in keeping the Archbishop focused on him and away from his allies as they mop up the rest of the cult. Once more, Petelgeuse questions how Subaru could be acting outside the Gospel's prophecy, and excitedly concludes that he must be pride in the flesh, but Subaru's rebuttal causes him to straight up like the creepy loser he is.
Wrong! My name's Subaru Natsuki! And I am the Knight of Emilia, the silver-haired half-elf. I don't know anything about this pride stuff.
I just want to emphasize this one more time. That whole dub is fantastic. As the chase ends, we see that Subaru has led Petelgeuse to the bottom of the same cliff where he died after the Maw-Beast curse killed Rem in episode 7. There, they're met by Julius, their mutual natural enemy, and the revelation that he's facing a spirit arts user causes Petelgeuse to quake with fear and anger. Having this battle come down to a 2-on-1 duel between the villain and these former rivals who are finally literally seeing eye to eye feels very dramatically satisfying, and the series justifies it well from a logical perspective too. They need Julius's spirit arts to finish Petelgeuse off. He's not as adept at fighting as Wilhelm, so he needs Subaru's vision to take on the unseen hands, and Subaru's spirit sensitivity means that any cultists or allies in the area would interfere with Necht, hence why they had to set up this ambush. I do think that Subaru and Julius spend a bit too much time bantering back and forth before the fight begins, though. I like how they reconcile their differences and resolve to trust each other here, but doing it in this instant kinda drags the pacing down and detracts from the impression that Petelgeuse's rage is snowballing out of control and leading him to make bad decisions. That said, those quibbles quickly fall away when the fight gets underway. The CGI used for the unseen hands here doesn't look quite as polished as the hand-drawn hands we've seen in previous clashes, but the change in technique allows them to move with a twisting, chaotic complexity that would have been very difficult to achieve through traditional means. The effect is especially effective in this harshly front-lit shot of his enraged, shrieking face. Like his shaded grimace in the maw of the cave, it really sells how dangerous his madness is. When the hands close in on Julius, they do briefly switch back to hand-drawn animation, using exaggerated perspective to accentuate the overwhelming feeling of the onslaught. which makes it all the more impactful when the Spirit Knight effortlessly blows them away seconds later. It is perhaps a little dumb of Subaru to explain to the villain exactly how Julius can see his secret weapons, but neither that nor Subaru's equally unnecessary comments on how disgusting it feels to share his senses hamper the purple-haired pretty boy as he dances around and destroys more of the hands under the rolling credits. The next episode begins with a brief aside where Wilhelm leaves Emilia to fend off another wave of cultists, reassuring her before he goes that she has the same selfless bravery as Subaru. Then we jump right back to where we left off, skipping the OP to give the action more time to breathe. Julius cuts one hand after another down with sharply animated skill, further stoking the flames of Petelgeuse's rage, but they keep on coming, and as he's still acclimating to the strange feeling of watching himself through another's eyes, Julius does take some brutal shots from the few that slip through his guard. The trained warrior adjusts quickly enough, though, and while the crazed cultist is pushed further onto his back foot, giving us some grandly rendered expressions of dismay and rage as he's forced to question his faith in the witch's love, Julius grows confident enough to go in for the killing blow. And that climactic attack is absolutely breathtaking. The whole fight is packed with sakuga, both in Julius's swordplay and the destruction of the hands, but the animators really pulled out all the stops here. The background is fully animated, allowing the camera to move freely through a sequence of 3 impressively long single shots. With the unseen hands moving in unison to grab the airborne Julius, Hiroyuki Takashima, who also created the incredible cut of Elsa attacking Reinhard from the tavern rafters in the first fight, found a way to work an Itano circus, an iconic style of animated missile barrage used to give mecha and sci-fi series with lots of air and space combat some extra oomph, into a ground skirmish in a fantasy anime, which is really damn cool on a conceptual level and even cooler to see in motion. For all the build-up Petelgeuse has been given as a bad guy, it feels fitting to see him taken down in such a flashy way, and I deeply appreciate that a solid 5 seconds of the sequence is dedicated to just watching him eat shit and ragdoll into a cliff. He does have one last trick up his sleeve, though, Uldana, an earth spell that surrounds him in a shield of rock, but Subaru brought along an explosive fire crystal and some mediocre pitching skills, which he uses to blow that last defense away. The last shot of Petelgeuse peeking through the crack in the rock before the blast obscures everything but his eyeballs has a distinctly Looney Tunes feel to it, and I think that's a particularly fitting way to finish off such an over-the-top, cartoony character. Not that this actually finishes him off. We've got a whole episode left to go, after all. As the dust clears, he has at least been pierced by Julius's spirit sword, which the knight says will tear his soul asunder, but before that can happen, he leaps into Subaru's body. This time, Subaru's ready for it, though, and before Sloth can assume complete control, he calls the witch to his side by describing Return by Death. Petelgeuse greets his goddess with religious rapture, expecting her to embrace him with her unseen hands, but despite his insistence and obsession, Satella does not love him back, and when she realizes he's not her beloved Subaru, she uses those hands to reject him quite violently. Back in his own body and abandoned by the witch, it seems like it's all over for Petelgeuse, but he has one last desperation play in his pocket, the same move he used when Ia attacked him in the last loop. He swings his unseen hand violently through the nearby cliff wall, causing debris to fall and crush him before the spirit sword can finish his soul off. It's enough to convince Subaru and Julius that he's done for, at least, but they have little time to celebrate before another problem arises. The cultist spy managed to hide a magic stone bomb in Emilia's carriage before they caught him, and they're too far down the road at this point for even Petrash to catch up with them. At least, not if Subaru also takes the highway. Fortunately, Otto's soul of language divine protection allows him to converse with all living creatures, meaning he can ask the critters in the forest for the fastest possible shortcut. Without a second's hesitation, or even bothering to hear what he wants in exchange, Subaru accepts a trade for the merchant's help, and they're off running through the woods. And even before things start going wrong, this chase scene is pretty exhilarating. ReZero's CGI can be a bit hit or miss, but the ground dragons and cart in this scene definitely hit, blending almost seamlessly with the traditionally animated elements, while facilitating some wild, frenetic camera moves that really sell the speed and danger of what the boys are doing. The typically timid merchant gets especially caught up in the excitement of it all, remarking, as Subaru understandably frets that they're gonna die, that he feels so alive and never knew he could do something so incredible, though that alive feeling may not last long given what he senses coming after them moments later. The creatures of the forest flee and hide as Petelgeuse pulls up behind them in his ghastly final form, a twisted mass of unseen hands puppeting the unsmushed remains of his corpse. Petelgeuse has now seemingly given up on the ordeal and is understandably focused solely on replacing this shit garbage body with Subaru's marginally better one. This chase plays out in parallel with the cult's violent pursuit of Emilia's caravan, where at first it seems as though she's comforting the children, when in reality they're clinging to her so tightly to keep their promise to Subaru that they'd protect her and keep her out of trouble. This cutaway serves to raise the stakes in two ways, by reminding us of who's in danger from the bomb, and showing us that Emilia is worried and waiting for the presently imperiled Subaru. It also gives us a clear sense of how much time and distance remains between their carts by showing exactly how far behind Emilia the explosions of Wilhelm's skirmish are. The old man, who hasn't had much of a chance to shine in this time loop, gets to remind us of what a goddamn badass he is by effortlessly cutting up some cultists in another stunning Sakuga sequence, and when they pass him a couple minutes later, we instantly know that Subaru and Otto have just about caught up. They've got to make it out of the woods first, though, and Petelgeuse isn't about to let them go easily. But at long last, our hero has grown to the point that I can call him our hero without qualification or irony. Well, almost.
Oh, that's so touching! You care about me that much, Will you be quiet already? I'm trying to make myself look good back here!
And he stands his ground, kicking the beast's grasping hands away and hurling jars of oil right at its ugly mug. He then lights the frightening creature's head ablaze with a rental Goa spell, courtesy of Julius's borrowed fire spirit, Ia, and as this is spirit magic, it does some serious damage to the incorporeal foe. He only gets more violent and dangerous in his death throes, however. The shots of the unseen hands busting up the back of the carriage as Petelgeuse closes in are impressively animated and genuinely frightening, especially with the dramatic lighting created by the flames around his face. It really feels like our hero is in peril here. Even so, he stares down death bravely, in stark contrast to how he's handled his fear in previous fights. I honestly can't say I'd be able to do the same in the face of this thing. It's a seriously creepy creature design, but there's also something pathetic about it. With his wildly flapping mouth full of scattered broken teeth and his empty eye sockets leaking tears of blood, Petelgeuse looks an awful lot like an overgrown zombie baby, and he acts like one too, whining incessantly as he pines for Satella's love in a manner that's, again, uncomfortably reminiscent of how Subaru screeched at Emilia before she left him at the capital. And that very familiar human showing of weakness helps Subaru figure out how to beat him. Right when he's almost in the unseen hand's grasp, he chucks Petelgeuse's gospel, the proof of his love, out the back of the carriage, and in taking his eyes off his prey and letting go of the carriage to grab it, the Archbishop leaves himself wide open to a well-deserved smack in the face. The gospel lands back in the carriage after the blow, while the pathetic beast is left dragging along behind it. The punch also left Subaru's finger bloodied in a significantly familiar way, and having discerned that the gospel tells the story of Petelgeuse's future, he uses that damaged digit to dramatically cap the book off with Owari, or The End, written in the Lagunican alphabet. This royally pisses off the Sin Archbishop, but before he can react, his unnecessarily frilly sleeve gets pulled into the axle of the cart, which chews up what's left of his fetid, ugly, grasping soul in yet another brilliant bit of animation as our hero stares on, unflinching in the face of danger like a proper badass. He's still got one last heroic deed to see through, though, and speaking of badasses, their cart passes through Wilhelm's battle with the cult seconds later. Seeing more of himself than ever in the young man fighting to save his lady love, the old warrior helpfully points their cart toward the caravan, all while defending them from the remaining robed creeps with some impressive swordplay and Mario stomps. As Subaru at last closes in on Emilia, his mind fills with thoughts of his first encounter with her, when she saved him, and she's likewise preoccupied with Subaru. Just as she's wondering why he'd go to so much trouble for her, her cart slides to a halt, and he leaps gallantly into the back, prying the bomb from beneath the floorboards and hopping back onto Petelgeuse to haul it away without saying a word. Well, until she asks him why, to which he responds by doing the bravest thing he's done all day.
"'Cause I love you, Emilia."
As she takes in those words in yet more stunned silence, he charges to lob the bombs into the white whale's carcass. He and Petelgeuse make it just in time, but aren't quite able to escape the blast, leaving Emilia to scramble through the debris looking for him. Luckily, she's able to find them, and with the combined healing powers of her magic and lap pillow, brings him back to the land of the living a few hours later. We all know what happens next. The sappy sweet ending that caps off this first season is powerfully emotional and, in my opinion, well earned, but this video's about the action, not the aftermath, and before that happy ending can play out, we need to take one more pause to appreciate the real hero here. That happy ending wouldn't have been possible at all without Petelgeuse. Subaru's time would have ended several times over had she not helped him dodge Betelgeuse's attacks and bravely rolled to protect him from that final explosion, taking grave injuries in the process. Somewhere along the line, our boy developed a proper classic fantasy soul bond with this goodest of good girls, and she will defend him to her dying breath. The loyalty, the dedication, why, she may be an even more loving, diligent, and loyal companion than Rem herself.
レムって誰のこと？
Ah, shoot, we missed a spot. Still, that tragic moment only appears at the end of the director's cut and start of the second season, and the original incarnation of this fight wisely chose to end it on one of the series' rare, unambiguously happy moments, letting Subaru bask a little in his victory and that tearful smile from Emilia. It's not just a satisfying payoff that makes this protracted battle work, though. It's everything. Subaru undertakes a turbulent emotional journey from his first encounter with Betelgeuse to his last, transforming from a pathetic, slothful, prideful worm into the kind of brave, selfless hero who deserves to call himself Emilia's knight. In the process, he earns the respect and friendship of the knight who once humiliated him, fights alongside him as an equal, and conquers the physical embodiment of his own entitled obsession. Of course, that emotional journey is only half the battle, and as a hero, Subaru would be nothing without a great villain to overcome. Betelgeuse leaves a powerful impression on us from the first moment he appears, and his charismatic menace only grows with each subsequent encounter, even as we slowly come to understand his madness. By the final confrontation, he's been built up so much that it almost feels like there's no fitting way to end him, but the animators, writers, and actors working on the series all gave everything they had to stick that landing. And in doing so, they made something that really stuck with a lot of people. Enough so that after 4 years away, the series was able to pick right back up where it left off without missing a beat or spilling even a drop of hype. Even with other much ballyhooed sequels to contend with, ReZero is the undisputed champ of yet another summer season. Though even with the pandemic-induced drought of new anime, there are a few that are very worth your time on top of it, and you can find out all about them, plus the ones that aren't, in my Summer 2020 Ones to Watch video. Link on screen and in the doobly-doo. Before you go though, let me know what fight you'd like to see me cover next on Animelee in the comments below. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.